So part 3 of the habitats lessons. So we're looking at impacts on ecosystems and mostly human impacts on ecosystems. So what a natural ecosystem is, and to be honest, there are very few of those left on our planet. Almost all ecosystems are influenced by human behaviour now. Even the deep ocean, we've certainly found plastic and rubbish down in those habitats. So basically, the definition of a natural ecosystem is that it's sustainable, can meet the needs of their organisms for extended periods of time without external resources. Now, when it says without external resources, this does not include sunlight or some other sort of energy source. So an extended period of time still with sunlight coming in and photosynthesis creating energy for the organisms in that ecosystem. In the deep ocean, we do have things called black smokers that are basically, they're kind of like these volcanic sort of vents, and they put out a lot of really hot water, and the animals down there, or the organisms down there, use the energy from that water. Plus also there's chemical reactions going on, and that's called chemosynthesis. So the producers in that environment aren't relying on sunlight. But anyway, so a sustainable ecosystem needs a wide variety of species. We call that biodiversity. Now, the reason they need a wide variety of species is different organisms do different jobs in an ecosystem. So in order for the ecosystem to be robust, in order for it to be strong, it needs lots of different species working there to do all those specific jobs. If you lose one or two of those species, that creates really big problems. Not always, but can create, I should probably say, really big problems for that ecosystem. And it can result in collapse. So too much interference can cause problems. So human interference or human activities changes ecosystems, making them unsustainable. So because they become unsustainable, it means that they need external inputs. So it needs something from outside of the ecosystem now because of the way we behave. Maybe we've taken something from the ecosystem. Maybe we've polluted the ecosystem. Maybe we've overhunted a particular species in the ecosystem, and so we've kind of hit it out of whack. As a result of that, we can have species becoming extinct. They can become extinct because we hunt them out. They can become extinct because of the pollution we produce, or they can become extinct because we've affected the ecosystem in another way. Maybe we've taken out a predator, and that's resulted in a prey animal overproducing in an ecosystem, ruining the habitat for something else. That's something that possibly happened. Alrighty, this is a little study on the eastern quolls. Bringing them home, there's a little video in the description, you can watch that. We're just going to have a look at this article now. Oh, it's come up on the other screen. Let's bring it across. Okay, so this was from a few years ago. We'll just go with a few years ago. So what happened is that the eastern quoll was extinct on the mainland, but they still existed in Tasmania. What we did is we bred them in sort of a sanctuary type thing, and there were 20 released in Boodaroo National Park, Jervis Bay. So that's in New South Wales, south of Sydney, a fair way south of Sydney. So we released these 20 in a national park down there. Okay, to see what would happen, we put radio collars on all of them, or we, scientists, put radio collars on all of them just to see where they ended up and what happened. And here's some little cute ones over here. Very sweet, aren't they? So they released them. 14 of the 20 animals died. Now, whilst that sounds terrible and you sort of think, oh, we shouldn't have done it, they were always going to die, we've got to learn these things. So these animals were they gave their lives hopefully for the benefit of their species in the future. So out of the 14 that died, 6 were still going. They had 4 girls and 2 boys, and they identified a range of threats. Now, all of those, so the quolls were released into their natural ecosystem. We'll just kind of make that clear. So 2 quolls had a run-in with a diamond python. Now, that's not such a big deal because that is a natural predator. So that's in balance with the ecosystem. That's a sort of behaviour that we can reasonably expect. Road mortalities, that's pretty sad. 4 quolls were near busy roads and they got hit by cars. So that's 6 of the 14 that didn't make it. Some of them fell victim to foxes, and one was taken by a domestic dog. Now, if you take your dog into a national park and you do not have it on a lead, this is the sort of thing that can happen. So that's a little bit sad. So traffic, a domestic animal, and foxes are an introduced species in Australia. So pretty much all but the first two that had the run-in with the python have died as a result of human activity. So it was over 3 months that they lost 75% of the population, and that was higher than they expected. But what they did notice is the ones that were remaining tended to be hanging around the same spots, sheltering in some human structures. I guess that's going to protect them from foxes and stuff like that, so the ones that chose to do that were a little bit more protected. And they're hoping maybe that they'll breed. Now, I did email these guys, and I just got an email back from somebody associated with them, but they couldn't give me the answer. I wanted to know how these quails were going, the ones that did make it. But yeah, watch the little video, and it talks about the rewilding. Rewilding is something that we're trying to do all around the earth to try to reintroduce species to ecosystems. So there's 3 levels of threat. So you've got endangered, you've got vulnerable, and you've got rare. So endangered means they're close to extinction. There's essentially not enough left to survive and reproduce. So those animals or those plants, they're on their way out. Vulnerable means they're at risk of becoming endangered. The species numbers are rapidly declining. So our behaviour has led to that in most cases. Look, in the history of organisms, most organisms have become extinct for one reason or another. The issue is that our behaviour is rendering extinction on a scale never seen on the planet since asteroids hitting it and stuff like that. So vulnerable are at risk of becoming endangered. Rare species. Now, rare means there's not many of them, but the thing about a rare species compared to a vulnerable or an endangered species is the numbers seem stable. So it may be that their particular habitats, maybe we've reduced the amount of habitat, but maybe what's remaining is the populations that are in there are okay. So critically endangered, the Hawksbill turtle. That Hawksbill I met at Turquoise Bay up at Exmouth. Now, if you ever want to see a hawksbill, Turquoise Bay is a really good spot for it. I haven't seen too many outside of Turquoise Bay, maybe half a dozen, but I've seen 10 or 15 at Turquoise Bay. You just got to swim off the beach. This is Carnaby cockatoo from Mora in Western Australia. They're endangered. Now, the issue with the Carnaby is habitat loss, plus those little corellas, those white birds, and bees as well, are competing with the Carnaby for nesting sites. They nest in the holes of trees. And so the problem for the Carnabys is they're not as aggressive. The little corella is much more aggressive, and so basically bullies the Carnaby out of that nesting space. The corella's an invasive species in Western Australia. Koalas are vulnerable. Now, that may have changed as a result of the bushfires we had in Eastern Australia over the Christmas of 2019-2020. A lot of habitat was lost, so it'd be interesting to see what the state of koalas to do with their threatened species level is now. Vulnerable, we can see this is a native clam to Australia, native to the Ningaloo Reef. They're vulnerable, and the Australian sea lion is also vulnerable. I met this guy at Rottnest Island. So there's a little spot there called Cathedral Rock, which is where a little group of males hang out. Dugongs are endangered, dingoes endangered, whale sharks endangered. So these guys are at threat of extinction. That's not good. So human impacts, there's another little video there. You'll see the link in the description. So this was backburning gone wrong. That was 2 years ago in Albany in Western Australia. The conditions weren't good for backburning, and some people went ahead and did it anyway, and it resulted in a number of fires. This is actually right in the city of Albany. That's a place called Little Grove, and people were very, very lucky that because it was in April, it wasn't as bad as it may well have been. So backburning involves a low intensity fire for the most part, and that causes problems because some plant life in Australia relies on an intense fire in order to get their seeds to grow, because the seeds are waiting for an opportunity, and if all of the trees above have been taken out, they're going to be able to get lots of sunlight if they stick their little heads up and start growing. So those seeds have evolved to do that because Australia does have intense fires. That's part of our natural system. So backburning kind of takes that opportunity away. So what's happened? We can have fires that are just way too intense for everything else. So some trees benefit from that, some tree species, but not all organisms do. So we're in a situation where we've got a lot of extreme weather events due to climate change. Very frustrating, people who don't accept the science behind climate change. It's overwhelming and bloody obvious, to be quite honest. So there's another little video there about just a week of wild weather. It was insane. Canberra had ridiculous things happen. So we've got these extreme weather events much more common, and we've got a longer and more severe fire season. So climate change is a human impact on ecosystems. One of the issues associated with climate change is species or ecosystems or habitats. They're generally okay to deal with extreme weather events when you have one every 10 years. But the problem is we're not having one every 10 years, we're having more frequently than that. So the ecosystem or the habitat doesn't have enough time to recover from that event. So the Great Barrier Reef is it's a good example, but it's bad. So they can survive a major bleaching event every decade. But the problem is they just had 3 in a row. So the Great Barrier Reef doesn't have much time left. There might be little pockets here and there of coral that survive, but it's going to be a desolate wasteland in the near future. Introduced species cause problems. Foxes, rabbits, goats, cane toads, camels, buffaloes, horses, cats and dogs. If you've got a cat, please keep it inside at night time. I see this cat every morning, or pretty much every morning when I take the dogs down to the beach. And it's always crossing the same road or around the same road. Sometimes comes in my backyard, but this morning I saw it coming back from the bush at about 6:30 in the morning. So we know what that animal was doing all night. It was killing native birds, small reptiles, things like that, things that can't get away from it because a cat is an amazing predator. Like, it has so many skills. It's fast, it can climb, sharp teeth, sharp claws. Organisms in our habitat just cannot deal with that, and they've evolved not to. So cane toads are another one. The problem with cane toads, apart from taking habitats away from other frogs and other amphibians, we've had some of our predators eat them and die because cane toads are toxic. Camels, ruining habitats, hooves, stuff like that. Okay, I'm not going to go on about it. Rabbits also outcompeting other animals that we have. Humans have tried to control invasive species using fences, diseases and hunting. Relative levels of success there. Hasn't been great. Anyway, so this picture here, that's a dingo fence to stop dingoes coming into southeastern Australia. So Lorna Glen is a place in the middle of Western Australia. Smack bam. Matua is its indigenous name. Now what Lorna Glen is, it's a fenced area. And that fenced area is keeping invasive species out, so cats can't get in there in particular. Foxes can't get in there either. Now what it's being used for is a bunch of animals from a place called Barrow Island, where they were doing a lot of gas mining. And so what they did was they transported numerous amounts of the small mammals from there to Lorna Glen, put them inside this fenced area, and then monitored their population numbers when the populations, and this is what this little guy's here, it's a bandicoot and it's got some little bubbers. She's very cute. So what they'd do is they would catch them, see how they're going, and basically look at the numbers, and when the numbers got big enough, they'd release ones into the wild, whilst maintaining. So it's almost like farming native mammals in a way that they can survive, and hopefully we'll get to a point where there's enough of these animals coming out to be able to survive. We really need to do what we can to eradicate wildcats, but that's another story. So population increases, we can see that there is a steady increase up to 2007. Yeah, it's continued to go in that direction, so that's pretty good. What they also do is they attract and support native predators like wedge-tailed eagles, because wedge-tailed eagles basically cleared out of the region because they didn't have much food. I don't even know if they identify a cat as food. They could probably take a cat down, but again, cats have lots of weapons, so it would be difficult even for a wedgie to take a cat down. Certainly not a dog, perhaps a fox. Probably have more success against a fox because they don't have sharp claws like a cat. Anyway, so bringing wedge-tailed eagles back, so adding some more balance to the ecosystem, trying to make it more sustainable. So other human impacts, our behaviour is pretty bad, damaging or completely destroying ecosystems. So other things we can do is we can take resources away, food, water, we can clear land, traffic going through, air, land and water pollution. We just need to be more responsible with the way that we behave. You know, it could be too late. So this is from a mine site, agriculture, and then pretty much all of Western Australia north of Geraldton has cows walking around everywhere, and goats, basically destroying lots of native flora. The thing about Western Australia, the thing about Australia is we didn't have any hooved marsupials. So the plants basically have evolved to not have to deal with a hooved animal. So bringing in hooved animals has created a fair amount of problems. So logging, mining, agriculture, urbanization. So there's two videos here I want you to watch. Living with Wildlife, Bears in Canada. It's a really great video. It's looking at how a population in Bow Valley in Canada has changed their own lifestyles and really hasn't been too impactful on them. Basically to try to protect the wildlife, including bears, in a really responsible way. They've done some very clever things that have been incredibly effective, so pretty good. And how wolves change rivers. So it's talking about Yellowstone National Park, where they reintroduce wolves, which had become functionally extinct in the United States. So they reintroduce them, and the positive effect that had on the ecosystem there. If you take an apex predator out, there's a fair amount of problems that can come from that. Okay, this was a food web on the Ord River up in Kununurra that I have been too lazy to finish because it just seems overwhelming. Anyway, well done. That's the end of this unit.